I'd say around 20 years ago, the paradigm started to shift as our clients became more tech savvy. Their technology knowledge started to rise, but we were at a deficit because we weren't raising up our business acumen, our business nomenclature, our knowledge of the business. And so now, to be an effective IT leader, I think you really need both.
Welcome to Technovation. I'm your host, Peter High. My guest today is Dwayne Allen. Dwayne's the Chief Technology Officer of Unisys, an IT services and consulting firm that earns in excess of $2 billion in revenue annually. He's been in his role for about 4 years, and Dwayne spent time building and implementing the company's data strategy. He's facilitated a product-centric approach to the company, and he spends time with clients, many of whom are fellow tech chiefs. He's also a board member at Cross Country Healthcare. I look forward to hearing more about all of the above and more through this conversation. Dwayne Allen, welcome to Technovation. It's great to speak with you today.
Hey, Peter, how are you today? Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I'm well, and thank you. I'm so glad that you're here. Well, good. Let's begin with Unisys's business, Dwayne. I think a lot of people who are watching or listening would know of it, but would love to hear in your own words a description of the business, please.
I'm really glad you asked that. One, Unisys is a global IT services and solutions company. We've got 3 dominant segments, which is digital workplace services, cloud applications and infrastructure, and enterprise computing. The reason I say that is whenever I'm speaking, I continue to be surprised and pleased and proud, if you will, of the legacy this company has. We've been around over 150 years. Some people knew the old Sperry and so forth prior to the merger to become Unisys. And we've made some changes. We're not as much into equipment as we used to be. We had exited some businesses. But what I'm pleased by is the name still lives large. So we're a couple of $1 billion in revenue. We have about 900 clients in about 45 countries. We serve a lot of industries and some demanding clients around the world. And we like the fact that they're demanding because that makes us better from IT services companies, life sciences companies, travel and tourism, and some others, retail. I could go on and on, financial services, public sector. So we're in a variety of businesses, and I think that's great because that helps us grow and learn and get close to our clients. And as we solve a problem for one, it's likely a problem another client has, and that just gives us another growth opportunities.
That's great. A great overview indeed, Dwayne. Thank you for that. I would love to hear more about your role also as Chief Technology Officer. No two CTO roles are exactly alike. What is the constitution of yours, please?
That's a great question. And I got to tell you, when I talk to colleagues, they're always envious of the role I've got. So first and foremost, I'd tell you this CTO role at Unisys is a strategic role. It's been reporting to the CEO for several years. And we made an announcement that we're about to have a transition. Our president and COO will become our CEO, which we're really excited about. And I'm excited about working with him because I met him since I joined almost 4 years ago. And so we're in what I'd call now CTO 3.0. So when I first got here, it was about innovation, emerging technologies, architecture, intellectual property and patents, emerging technologies, and ecosystems. And we had just gone through a big reorganization. So the belief was we needed the CTO organization to be that connective tissue and also look around the corner as we're developing solutions and so forth. So I'd say the first phase of my tenure here at Unisys was driven by that. I'd say the last 2 years, it's been focused around AI. And again, that was part of a strategic focus. We had come out of a board meeting early in 2023, and the operative question was, what's the next big focus for us? And as we went around the table, I was one of the folks that commented to say, look, I think the time is right for us to go all in on data analytics and AI. We're an IT services company. And the other colleagues and our CEO was very supportive. And that led to some presentations to him and the leadership team. And then I was on the agenda for like the next 3 board meetings, and that launched a big, exhaustive effort. And then I really reorganized my organization to around AI enablement, driving internal use and capability and adoption, AI portfolio. And we also thought the time was right for an AI practice, a consulting and advisory arm to help clients that aren't exactly sure what they want to do. And I still had intellectual property patents and some other things. So I call that CTO 2.0. And now we're in what I'll call CTO 3.0. And what I always do every couple of years is I am fortunate that I will meet with the CEO and COO and talk about our strategy, our priorities, and our focus areas and say, where do you need me to help? But most importantly, I always want to work on something important. I don't want to work on some small incremental thing. What's important to the company because I want to make a difference. And so the focus now is going to be really centered around solution development, how we use AI in solutions, what's our solution strategy, what's the architecture, how do we support solutions and create that capability and agility to grow at an even faster pace. So we're going to focus on helping accelerate the value we deliver to our clients. So that's going to be the big focus of my organization over the next couple of years. And I'm really excited about it because I had my team together just last week and our president and CEO joined us, and he could not have been more complimentary and more deliberate around how important this role is, my team is, and how he's counting on us to help the company be successful going forward. So again, you want to work on something that's important to the company. I feel like you always get that support. It brings with it a little pressure, of course, but I think that's good because they're putting pressure on you because they care and they know it's important to the company. So in general, I'd say the CTO role I have has always been strategic. So for example, some CTOs have responsibility for cyber. I have another really, really talented colleague we brought in a couple of years ago, almost actually a year ago, who has responsibility for that. He does a great job. Operational responsibilities, network, and things like that. I have another colleague that has responsibility for that. So I focus on strategic items. It involves working and collaborating with all of my peers and helping to try to do what's important for the company, taking it forward.
Well, something I'm hearing through that description calls to mind something you mentioned to me last time we spoke together, and that is you liken your role to that of a quarterback of technology in some ways. And I can see the way in which, even just as you've begun this description in terms of your collaboration with some of the other people that run other technical disciplines, with the CEO, the COO, the broader executive team, even at the board level, that this quarterback analogy is appropriate. Share a bit about your own thoughts about that collaboration writ large across the organization.
Well, and it's interesting you say that. I agree, and I've probably evolved that a little. I call it orchestration now. And the reason I use that term is nothing occurs without everyone buying in and taking some ownership. So I've got some colleagues who are responsible for business units and solutions. And it's important that we have a collective vision that we all buy into. So sometimes when you represent yourself as the leader or the chief person driving all these things, it kind of undermines their role, their capabilities, and their commitment. So we're all in it together as it relates to AI. We needed one person to do updates for the board and things of that nature. I rarely did a presentation that they weren't involved in, that I didn't represent priority activities we have going on in each business, because it's important that I represent the team, not myself as the leader. And so I kind of see it that way now. It is a quarterback, it's orchestration. It involves a lot of relationship building. And to be honest, as they were talking about what they want our group to do going forward, that plays quite a bit into it to say, look, you've got these relationships with the businesses, you've got relationships with solution folks, you got relationships with architecture folks. Let's work together on this long-term strategy around enterprise solution development, architecture, and support. And it can only be done by working with everyone. If anyone shows up to say, I'm the grand poobah and I'm in charge, that tends not to work because everyone's talented. So, and what's great is I've got members of my team that have the exact same mindset. They're all good relationship builders and they have good relationships and they're highly respected. So I'm excited about what we're doing going forward.
I can certainly hear it in your voice, certainly, Dwayne. I love that way in which you typified that, the team sport that this is. And even as you describe the CTO organization as opposed to just yourself, I can see how much you recognize the extent to which your success is the collective success.
It's really the CTO organization and the entire organization. It's not even
exactly.
It's like how we're all working together. And I'm also fortunate. I want to make sure I make this statement overtly. I'm really fortunate that I have some great colleagues. Not everyone always likes to play this way. So as we set this up, my business leaders who are peers of mine, we're all partners to say, sure, what do you need? How do we represent this? And I think it's because I tried to approach it with some humility to say, I need your help so we can pull the story together. And I think that's really worked. But I always want to give them credit because it's not done without them and them giving guidance to their teams to work with us and all that.
Makes sense. Makes sense. I wanted to also ask you a related topic to it. I know from our past conversations, you've talked about how much non-technology resources, colleagues of yours have grown in terms of their tech savviness and the advantages there are now of having a broader swath of the organization that is very tech cognizant, tech curious, tech forward. Can you talk a bit about how that has evolved? Very different, I'm sure, from the earlier parts of your tenure or even of your career, where the preponderance of tech talent was in an IT organization. Now it's become much more democratized. I'd love to have you comment on that.
That's a great question. And I tend to speak about this when I'm speaking at conferences with colleagues or folks a little more junior in their career. And I always say back in the stone tablet days when I started coding by candlelight, you just go to a meeting and say, tell me your requirements. We'd write it down on a piece of paper and then we'd show it to you. And, we'd start to build a system, more of a waterfall approach. And then I'd say around 20 years ago, the paradigm started to shift as our clients became more tech savvy. Their technology knowledge started to rise, but we were at a deficit because we weren't raising up our business acumen, our business nomenclature, our knowledge of the business. And so now to be an effective IT leader, I think you really need both. You need that technology skill, but you need to understand the business and understand that our business colleagues now have more technology knowledge. Now, at times, they might not have as much as they think they know, but that's just like us. I might comment on marketing, and the marketing executive would say, Dwayne doesn't know anything about putting together an ad campaign. So you almost have to participate and look at the intent. But I think it's a very, very different world. And I always say it's important to make sure on our side, we're speaking the language of the business. I always tell a story at my own expense of how I did a big presentation for a manufacturing company on how we were going to upgrade all the ERPs and all this stuff. And I remember the segment president stopped me in the middle of the presentation. I was horrified. And he said, Dwayne, for that much money, I could build several plants. Like, I don't think this is a good idea. And so I was horrified. I felt like I failed, and I felt like my organization was counting on me. So a year later, I had partnered with the head of manufacturing for that business, came back, and we did a manufacturing supply chain transformation presentation. And we talked about advanced supply chain, material management, inventory turns. And they said, how soon can you go? And it was the exact same technical upgrade. But I was talking about patches and releases and instances and supportability that no one cared about. And so when you speak the language of the business, you get them engaged and you say, okay, you're talking about something that's going to help me be successful. Let's do that. And so I think that's what's going on, that we have to lean in more on our business acumen and knowledge, and also understand, respect, and almost cultivate and encourage their growing technology knowledge. Because if they get better at it and we understand how to talk to one another, ideation yields the best results. So it's a growth on both sides, and it's been a bit of a journey, but I like it. I think at times it's helpful. Sometimes they've read an article or they saw someone speak at a conference and they've got this idea, and it might not necessarily be exactly the right fit for us, but the fact that they're thinking differently, I don't want to lose that enthusiasm and that interest.
And I'd love to, as I think back to your description of CTO 1, 2, and 3.0, 2.0, as you mentioned, was about AI enablement, driving internal usage, adoption, et cetera. A lot of engagement of the rest of the organization, and I imagine in some really creative ways to deliver what you just described as well, meeting them halfway in their areas of expertise with your area of expertise. Can you talk a bit about the methods that you used in order to upgrade the entire organization's understanding of and ultimately usage of artificial intelligence?
Oh, that's a great question. So what we did was we partnered with our learning and training organization and picked out a few select representatives from across the company, worked with vendors, put together a new training curriculum, and did some pilots. And then what we did is we organized this, because we wanted feedback, because if it wasn't working, better to know it now than to get well into it. And then all of a sudden people are saying, hey, this isn't effective. And then you get the noise and the feedback and so forth. So what we did is we organized it into these 5 persona families, if you will, that correlated to your role in the organization and technical continuum. So the early persona would be just around general awareness, familiarity, just so you know a little bit more about AI. The next one might be for someone that's in a sales or go-to-market position. The next one might be someone who's in an operational position where they could take advantage of this in a lot of areas to be more effective, on up the continuum to those with the most technical skill. And we had in Persona 1, 4 courses, in Persona 2, 7 courses, in Persona 3, 8 courses, in Persona 4, 13 courses, and in Persona 5, 15 different courses, because you want to make sure the training is targeted so it can be applicable right after you take it. But the most impressive thing is we set this up to organize training across the entire company, 13,000 employees, and we had a completion rate of 97.7%. I'm looking at it right now because I wanted to make sure I have my facts right. But I think, speaking of like team and orchestration and those types of things, that only works because you got to get the right representatives. They've got to be passionate about this. They got to engage and give us feedback. This vendor, I tried this, it doesn't work. The way it scored was a little quirky. And you work all that out in what I call a lab environment. So when you roll it out, it could be successful. So we use knowledge and awareness and training as the tide that could raise all boats. So that's how we started internally. And then with a lot of our solutions folks and business leaders and sales folks, we just started working and ideating with clients. And that's when we started to develop our large portfolio of 120 something projects broken down between production, pilot, POC, and the portfolio group I mentioned earlier. That's what we started tracking on a monthly basis. And then we prioritize the top priorities. So that training starts, you start engagement. To follow up on the question you mentioned earlier, we were talking about business colleagues. The same was going on with our clients. And for the most part, most of our clients have their own IT department. So when they're coming to us, they need some additional help. The other thing I'd say, because your question sparks another thought I wanted to mention, because when I mentioned CTO 3.0, please in no way interpret that AI is going away or is no longer important. But if you pay attention to most technologies over time, they weave their way into the business. And I like to say, when the technology becomes part of the second sentence, you're on your way to adoption. So you can go all the way back to the web when that came about. So people would say, we're doing e-commerce, we're doing web, and so forth. Now, I think what you just say is, you don't say, I'm going to this online app to figure out what I want to buy. You just say, I'm going to Amazon. You don't talk about the technology. You don't talk about, analytics and suggested pricing and all of that. And same now, you don't say, I'm using a digital logistics app to secure transportation. You just say, I'm calling an Uber. You don't talk about GPS or surge pricing that we all love and analytics and so forth. The same with digital, right? So I think that's what's going to start to happen with AI, is that you're going to start to talk about the solution and the outcome, and AI will be how you got there. So that's what we're doing. But AI is important. It hasn't gone anywhere, but we're weaving it into the larger solution development story because it's not going anywhere. And as our CEO says, within a couple of years, AI is a part of everything anyway. So if you just keep talking about that, it kind of loses its steam over time. But to the extent anyone wants to know about it, anyone's got a question about it, we will have the requisite data and answers. But that's one of the reasons that we made the evolution, if you will, and shift to what I'm calling the third version of CTO.
Yeah, appreciate you sharing those insights, Dwayne, certainly. And I want to double click on another point that you raised, which is so interesting, and that is your team and your involvement with customers ultimately. That in many cases, Unisys's customers might be peers of yours going through their own journeys akin to what you've described. And as you mentioned at the outset of our conversation, you attempt to take all that you've learned and bring that to your customers as well. Can you talk a bit about your collaboration with Unisys's customers, more broadly speaking?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And it's funny, the other thing I'd say is that when I approach many of our customers, a great starting point and sometimes a good credibility starter is to remind them that I spent most of my career in their shoes as a CIO, as a CTO, working with an outside partner, the first thing I'm trying to figure out is, do these guys know what they're talking about? Are they going to add me value, or are they going to suck up my time and I want to get out of here? So I try to remind them that I know what that is like. And that's one of the things I like about the way Unisys has embraced this role. They still do. That there's a lot of things that they want me and my team to do to help the company, but there's certain areas where they want us to get in front of clients, because some of our clients want to know what we're doing technically, or they want an additional voice. In fact, a little bit of this is similar to what I was doing at Microsoft for a while, where people thought of Microsoft as just an IT services company, and they said, no, we want to talk manufacturing, we want to talk retail, we want to talk healthcare. And we brought in people with that experience to help. So as it relates to customers, I think that's an important aspect of being able to connect with them, bring them up to speed on what we're doing. And to be honest, it's also a great listening opportunity and learning opportunity. So as we're going back and thinking about our solution strategy or what we're trying to do, or some of the problems we're trying to solve for other parts of the company, coming back to say, I met with this client and they aren't worried about, analytics or collaboration or whatever it is at all. They're focused on something else that I never would have known. And you sometimes lose things in translation. If someone's at a meeting and they send you a note or recap it to you, and then you talk to notes and then I share it to my team, it's like the telephone game. Sometimes you lose a little bit. So those opportunities are invaluable. And I've had a chance to participate in some pitches, sometimes kick off as the executive sponsor, and just the listening to how we pitch, how we show up, and the questions clients ask, I think is really helpful input as we're working on a long-term strategy.
Very, very interesting, Dwayne. Thank you for those further reflections as well. I would love to also just ask you a bit more about, as you think about the use of artificial intelligence or perhaps generative artificial intelligence within your setting, what are some of the use cases that have you most excited? Recognizing it's a continuum and an ongoing journey, it's not as though there's a destination necessarily to reach here, but with the progress made so far, what are some of the things that have you most excited?
I think it's more of a concept, the prospect of using a tool that can continue to learn with the right guidance and boundaries to take you to places you hadn't anticipated before is great. That to me is the promise of generative AI specifically. It reminds me years ago when I was in banking after 9/11 and the Patriot Act. A lot of us were buying anti-money laundering systems that were trying to predict fraud patterns. So, because what they realized is some of the 9/11 terrorists had used the credible U.S. banking system to finance terrorism. So they figured out what the threshold is. They'd go below it, transfer money here, do an ATM deposit here, move it around. So, but we were manually trying to create those rules. And okay, we found something, or we find these rules makers. Here you got the chance to set the guidance and rules where the output of one cycle becomes the input to the next. And that also presents some complications because it's not that easy. And I always say that Chat GPT was both a blessing and a curse. The blessing is that it put AI and the opportunities that AI could do for you at the forefront. Like, you couldn't open any article, you couldn't turn on the news, you couldn't do anything where people weren't talking about AI. And when they said AI, they were dominantly talking about generative AI. The downside was that it was actually so easy. All you needed was an ID, no training, no documentation. You typed in real English and you got results. Now that was great because it was dominantly starting with words and large language models searching billions of lines of text. And as you start to move to things more complicated, that are calculations that might approve your loan or set a pharmacy recipe and so forth, it takes a little bit more time. So I think at times the promise is still real and very evident, and I'm still continue to be enthused and excited about the future that generative AI can bring for all of us. But I think the enthusiasm around the pace got a little out of sorts, a little bit ahead of itself, because people said, listen, I started using ChatGPT and I'm writing all these documents. I can't imagine what it's going to do with all these calculations and so forth. And I think some of those take a little more time. You got to do testing. And as I said, you've got to set the right boundaries. In addition to that, it's important to think about the ethical use of AI. So speaking of partnership and orchestration, I've got a woman on my team who's really good at this, and she has formed this outstanding partnership with legal. And we have developed an AI acceptable use policy. We also got an AI acceptable use guideline and site So as people are starting to think of these things, again, it's not just the IT folks anymore. So let's give people some principles and guidelines with which to think about this, and also think about how you use it. For example, in some cases, we will say that a decision will still always be made by a human. AI can feed you a lot of data and inform you, but we don't want to be in a position where we somehow get some accountability and someone could say, well, the system did that. There's other times we do want to do that because it's driving efficiency and moving rote tasks aside. So a bit of a long-winded answer, but a lot of opportunities in financial services, in healthcare, in manufacturing. There's a slide I have. We're going to talk about a variety of industries, both external client industries and internal. If you think about marketing and sales, our ability to take in RFPs and decompose them real quick to see where it fits, where we have to spend our time, because the cycles are changing. Again, back in the stone tablet days, people would issue an RFP and say, get back to us in 4 to 6 weeks. Sometimes it's 2 weeks, sometimes it's 10 days. So they want their answers faster, and to give a requisite, solid, credible response, you need to increase your capabilities. And that's where tools like AI can help you. Contract analysis, variety of things like that. Just a lot of areas where I think it can really help. Also in the public sector, insurance, transportation. We've got some opportunities with logistics and routing. And so there's just a lot of opportunities, as well as what we're doing with client management, HR. You think about a large company like ours, as we have bids, how do we have the right talent that can staff that? So if we win the bid, we can join the client right away and bring staff to bear to really set a good first impression as they start to transition their services to us.
Excellent. Thank you again for that overview, Dwayne. I wanted to also raise the point, as I mentioned in the introduction, that you are a board level technology executive. You joined the board of Cross Country Healthcare. I'd love to have you talk a bit about how that opportunity emerged, and as well as what you gained from joining a board back into your operational role.
So that's a great question. What's interesting is, and I heard this years ago, but I didn't really experience it till recently, many boards are now starting to, as they have board members age, retire, look at the composition of the board and look at the skills, and are starting to say, we need someone with a little more technology skill in the boardroom. It's funny, years ago, a family friend of mine who was on the board of several large Fortune 500 companies shared a story with me probably like 20 years ago, where there was a big issue and someone had just done a presentation about ERP. And when the person left, they looked around the room and said, does anyone know anything about ERP? We heard the presentation, but I'm not sure there's a person in the room who can help us navigate it. And I think that started it. So with Cross Country, they're a healthcare staffing, advisory, and consulting firm. They do a lot of placement of nurses, travel doctors, and so forth. And they started to create an app, much like an Uber. So if you are and I'm not doing it justice, but an app. So let's say you're in Washington, D.C., you're a nurse, you're either young and don't have a family, or are older and your kids are gone. You can come to Florida in nice weather and work at some hospitals. So how do we do staffing? How do we do allocation? I've learned a lot about how hospitals work and hospital administration. Sometimes they sign contracts like we do for contingent workers, for a nursing staff, for peak seasons and things of that nature. So they wanted an IT person on the board as they started to look at some of those things, or acquisitions or partners who could help them a little bit. And of course, AI became part of the agenda there. So it was an interesting dichotomy for me, where twice in 1 week, I'm presenting to the Unisys board talking about AI. And 2 weeks later, I'm in a board meeting having AI presented to me. And, when it comes to technology topics, you have to exercise a little discipline. There's a general phrase when it comes to boards around nose in, fingers out, something like that. So you are governance, you're not management. So you want to ask questions, you want to make sure they're doing the right thing, but you don't want to jump in and try to take on kind of a management role. It's been a tremendous experience for me. I think the other thing I'd say to colleagues interested in joining boards is, remember what I said earlier about speaking the language of the business and rounding yourself out? Yeah. In many cases, the boards are looking for someone with technology expertise, but they want someone that can be a full participant on all topics. So years ago, when I was CIO of a segment, the component segment at Cummins, inside of that segment, there were 5 businesses: emissions, electronics, filtration, turbo technologies, and fuel systems. So I would have an IT leader participate in the business meetings. And my guidance was always, when you go to that staff meeting, don't be the person that sits there quietly until an IT topic comes up and then you speak. You need to learn what's going on. So if they're talking about transportation, if they're talking about safety, whenever I did a plant tour, I usually gave some feedback about safety versus just the IT system, so the people understood that I fully understood the business, the mission, and what was important. So I think as people are looking at boards, and someone's talking to me about another one now as we speak, I think they want to believe that someone can fully understand where the business is going, but also have that IT expertise that they don't have. But I do think it's a tremendous opportunity for a lot of IT colleagues, because I know a lot of IT colleagues like myself who've learned over the years, like the mistake I shared with you earlier, where I was talking about releases and instances and upgrades and patches, and no one was interested in that. No one's going to spend millions of dollars for that. But when I talk about transforming supply chain and manufacturing and your business, then they're interested in that. And so I think it's a tremendous opportunity. As you can imagine, IT is in the middle of everything. I always tell students when I present to them that I think it's the greatest profession. I've been doing it for years. I've been recruited to leave IT several times. I just think there's no greater profession because it is in the middle of everything. It could be finance, it could be sales. IT plays a key part of it. So I think it's a tremendous place to be. And now companies are starting to mention that. It's picking up on what you said earlier. As their IT knowledge rises, they're starting to understand what they don't know and some of the expertise they need. So it's been a great experience for me, but also I had to step up my end of the bargain. I had to learn a lot about hospitals and healthcare and administration and how laws are different in all different states, and how you have to operate differently when you're in a rural area and you might be more dependent on Medicare than a big metropolitan area like Washington, where many of the people might be on a healthcare plan and payments might occur differently and all that. So there's a lot that I learned that I didn't know previously about healthcare. I thought that was helpful, but I think it's been a great experience. It's a great learning experience. It's helped me as I think about how do I present to my board and where their head's at and what's important to them. So I consider myself really, really fortunate in that regard.
That's fantastic. Thank you for that overview, Dwayne, and very interesting to hear your reflections on now having been a board member for some time. I wanted to ask you, we've talked about a number of rising trends of relevance that you and the team are focused on writing and taking advantage of. Any others now here relatively early in 2025 that come to mind that have you particularly excited, Dwayne?
So what's interesting is the one, I'll give you a story. So years ago when I was at Cummins, I would try to get many of the typical big 6, now I guess big 4, Accenture, PwC, EY, to meet with me and talk about what's going on as a way to get an early signal. And I remember years ago, one of them said something about something called big data. And I'd never heard of that. And I was like, what is big? What are you talking about? And of course, that became the rage, over time. I think the next thing on the horizon, and while it's been talked about, I don't think we fully figured out its true impact, but it's going to be big, is quantum computing. I think that's going to be the next big thing. And what's going to be interesting about quantum is I think it's going to matriculate in a way below the surface. AI is up here. It's talked about all the time. Everyone's understanding. Quantum is the power in the background of computing and algorithms and encryption and quantum resistance. There's just a lot of different aspects to it. And over time, you got to stay ahead of it so that you can continue to protect your systems as that becomes more common. So I think that's going to be the next big thing people are going to talk about, but it won't catch the hype cycle that AI did. But I think it's going to be big. And then I think the other thing, it's a common skill that we've all had to learn. And like I said, back in the old days, we all wrote code. Now we're integrating products. And I think figuring out how to manage that ecosystem, particularly with the speed with which new products come out, new standards come out, is going to be a new distinguishable skill. It's always been one, but I think it's just going to go up a level because the pressure to respond is going to get higher, and you can't do it by yourself. So you're going to have to pick partners. And sometimes you're going to have to come up with a new assessment method because you don't have 9 months to assess the partner and do a pilot. And the expectations, you need to get something up and running in 6 months. And to do that, you got to pick the partner, you got to vet them, you got to do a pilot, and you got to get started. And all of our processes and thinking haven't accelerated to scale for that yet. So you asked for one thing, I think I gave you two, but one's a technology and one's almost a management principle in our profession that I think is going to be pushed.
Certainly important ones for us to remain abreast of, to see the continued progress. Thank you for sharing those. I wanted, before I let you go, Dwayne, to ask you if there's anything you've recently read, watched, and or listened to that you would recommend to others. Anything you've recently noticed that you would underscore or share with others?
So I'm looking at a book now. We'll grab it. I haven't finished reading it, but it caught my eye. It's called The 5 a.m. Club. And so I think at this stage, and maybe at this age for all of us, the question is, how do we optimize our performance, our intellectual capacity? When is my brain working at its best? When am I going to deliver my highest output? Because the number of hours in the day are limited. Capacity is stretched. And for me, this is a little bit more personal, but there's times when I have the free time. I've got it set aside and blocked, but I don't feel like my brain is operating at the highest capacity and full cylinders as other times. So this book talks about that. It's got some trends and techniques and things about what you do when you first wake up and all that. So not so much a technology book, but something about me as a leader to help me better leverage my own intellectual capacity, my leadership capacity, my team's capacity. So that's what I'm reading right now.
Great suggestion. I appreciate you mentioning it. I had not heard of that, but I'll definitely give it a look. Thank you for noting it, Dwayne. And Dwayne, thank you for, more broadly speaking, for a fantastic conversation. It's so wonderful to see you, to hear about the continued evolution of your role now into its third phase, some of the many exciting things that you and the team are working on to improve not only Unisys, but the operation of Unisys's customers, more broadly speaking. It's been a terrific conversation. Thank you.
No, I appreciate it. In close, I would have to tell you that I've been doing this a long time. I've worked for 7 companies in 4 different industries under 10 CEOs. And I got to tell you, what we're doing right now at Unisys has me really excited. It's like that one opportunity to pull it all together. We have a great team. We got great colleagues. We got a great strategy. Now we just have to execute it. So I'm hoping in the future to come back and share more exciting things about what we're doing.
I'll look forward to it. Thank you, Dwayne.